Hey guys, welcome back. We are already at episode 2. I can't believe just a few weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, I had this crazy idea to start a podcast, and here we are, fixing to drop episode 2. Um, I can tell you, I am very pumped about this guest, and I'm not going to tell you who it is. You're going to have to stick around to find out, but I'll give you a hint. They live in Washington State. And you may ask yourself, how does this relate to hiking and backpacking in Texas? We'll stick around to find out. Welcome to the Trailblazing Texas podcast. We are into episode 2. And as I have already stated, I have a very, 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 very special guest. One of my good friends, John, coming all the way from Washington State. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, buddy. So it's so good to be here with you, and I'm happy to talk with you.
I can say that almost everything that I know about hiking and backpacking comes from this man. He is probably the most experienced hiker backpacker that I've ever met. And I always like when I tell people about John, he's like this mythical person, like I'm like, this guy should be a guide. Like he's the stories that he has are amazing. So kind of just to kick this off, like how did you even get into hiking and backpacking?
Right. So yeah, I'm a Pacific Northwest guy. I live near the Cascades. I'm about an hour from Mount Rainier National Park, but I was actually born in West Texas. So I'm a petroleum baby. My dad worked in the oil fields as he was putting himself through college and became a reservoir engineer, petroleum engineer. So I was actually spent the first 12 years of my life in Midland and Odessa, Texas. So my background of the outdoors was birthed and started in Texas. And as a kid, we used to go on camping trips to the Davis Mountains.
Nice.
I did go to Big Bend once or twice, and I also went to the Guadalupes once or twice. But we went to Fort Davis on a very regular basis. I used to be involved in, I believe it was called Royal Rangers, kind of the Southern Baptist version of the Boy Scouts or something along those lines. And
Yeah.
I can remember many camping trips to the Davis Mountains, and I remember it's one of my earliest memories, being 4 or 5, and we hiked to the top of one of those mountains, kind of right there on the peripheral of that campground. And I've since been back as an adult, and I realized they're like 500-foot tall hills, but but as a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old or whatever it may have been, the experience of struggling to get to the top of that thing, and then the elation of making it to the top and seeing what you could see was something that got a hold of me as a very young kid and hasn't let go since.
Yeah, like the times that I've been able to spend with you, I can always tell when you talk about the Davis Mountains and your grandfather and the trips that y'all had, like there's a little twinkle in your eyes. So like, I can tell that those times were very, very special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I went back for the first time here about 5 or 6 years ago. It had been 30 years since I had been in the Davis Mountains, and it was an emotional experience to say the least. I got to drive back in there with Megan, and she loves to say that she wants to see me see places.
Yeah.
and yeah, it was almost like a quasi-religious experience being back in there and seeing stuff that's so far back, 3 decades ago, and yet a familiarity to it. And
I mean, it's like that park bench. I think you said that this was the park bench that you and your grandfather sat at, or by, so.
Yeah, I have a all my life. People have always marveled at my memory, but I remember precise rocks and precise benches and things that happens to me all the time in the Cascades. Well, Megan and I will be hiking, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember when me and my mom sat on that rock back in 2007 or something or another along those lines. But yeah, place and geography and have always been kind of memory markers for me.
Yeah, and I know, like, over the years and us having the discussions, hiking and backpacking, and also like you doing it solo, I think means a lot to you, and just to be able to get away and just kind of like, I don't know, I don't know if it's release is the right word, but just to just be in the mountains. And
Yeah.
do you find that the majority of your hiking and backpacking revolves around solo, or is it pretty much, like family, friends, and
Yeah, it varies from year to year, but I definitely do sometimes have an urge or a need to go to the mountains alone. I'm a I'm a highly introverted person.
yeah,
You've heard me say this before, but I'll repeat it. I love it. It's we have two words in the English language that we use to describe the experience of being alone. When we want to talk about how it's bad or it's not fun, we say I'm lonely. And then when we want to talk about being alone in a way that is positive, we say solitude. And
exactly, yeah,
and I'm definitely one of those. I mean, I think all people can experience solitude and all people can experience loneliness, but I am one of those people where my solitude portion of the pie is much larger than my lonely piece. But yeah, I mean, it certainly going to the mountains with one or two or three or four, a small group of people that I have an intense friendship with. It it most certainly, you know, fosters that to be even stronger and to grow with one another as you pretty much spend 24 hours a day with each other. When you're in the
yeah.
when you're in the mountains, that's especially true climbing where you're literally tied together by a rope. But
It sometimes you actually on these trips, like you share some very intimate moments, like Henning, who I usually hike with now, like, we don't realize he's around the corner using the restroom, and we walk around the corner like, whoa, hey.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
There's times where that kind of stuff happens where you just can't, like, you literally, like, safely you can't. There is no such thing as privacy. So
oh, absolutely, yeah. So there is a bond between hikers and backpackers for sure.
hmm
And it's funny that I say that getting to know you, that you're probably the most experienced hiker backpacker that I ever met, but I think there's probably one other that might equal you, and that's your mom. And I never got to meet her, but the stories that you would share about y'all's adventures and about her, just like, she was always hiking and backpacking.
yeah,
It seemed, like,
she
and
had the same passion that I had for it. The big difference between me and her is my career, my job that I work just doesn't afford me quite as much time to get into the mountains as hers did. She was a school teacher for the last couple of decades of her life, so she had 8, 9, 10 weeks off, whatever it is, in the
yeah,
summertime, and then all of the holidays and that kind of stuff. And so she got into the mountains probably more than I did.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, I have a favorite story, and you have to share this story. And like, but you have to set it up like
Yeah.
set it up and deliver that. This is my favorite story ever.
Yeah, my mother, she was, we're all afraid of things, and everybody feels fear when they go on hikes or go into the mountains, and appropriately so. They are a dangerous place where things can happen. But very oftentimes, as human beings, we're not necessarily rational about our fears. And one of the things that my mother was acutely afraid of was bears, which bears do sometimes kill or injure people, but it's exceedingly rare
No,
statistically. But that was one thing she was afraid of. One thing she was not afraid of, however, was storms and wind and so on and so forth. And here in the Pacific Northwest, where I live, every people that aren't from here, the thing you immediately think about when somebody says Seattle or Portland is you think of rain, and rightfully so. It is
no,
very wet. Our weather patterns tend to be, dominated throughout the all 3 seasons other than summer by the jet stream, and it tends to point right at Western Washington. So we do get a lot of rain. And then because of that, as those systems come across out of the Pacific and over land, they as they run into the Cascades, the air, of course, it rises, and then they get a lot of snow, and so the Cascades are known for snow. Well, that also equals windstorms. As those systems push in, they tend to funnel through the passes, and so we have on the western slopes where a lot of our hiking trails are, it can be extremely windy. You can get some pretty extreme windstorms during the wintertime. And there was this one particular occasion where a windstorm had been issued. They had already, they shut down the floating bridge heading east out of Seattle across Lake Washington, which is something they do when it gets really bad windy, just so that trucks don't get blown over and everything. And there had been a high wind warning in effect that morning, and my mother decides to drive up to.
When you say high wind warning, that means like the news is saying don't go out.
Yeah.
Like it's not just like
winds sustained at 50 and gusts 70, 80, 90, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in pockets in the mountains, depending on where you're at and depending on how the water, or how the wind funnels through passes and stuff, it can be much worse. And so my mom decides it's a good idea to go on a hike. We talked fairly regularly, but I didn't actually know that she had done that morning. But she gets up there and she's in the woods, which a lot of the just to kind of explain the geography of Western Washington for those who might not be familiar. This is rainforest. We have lots of trees, large Doug fir forests, and tree line in Washington tends to start about 5,000 feet, 6,000 feet, but most of our hiking trails, at least the ones you would do during the wintertime, are going to be lower down. Maybe you park at 1,000 feet and you top out at 5,000 feet, something along those lines. But so you're hiking in the woods, and she's in the woods, and the predicted windstorm shows up just like it was predicted. And that is dangerous. Her bears statistically are not dangerous, but being in a forest during the windstorm is very dangerous. Trees start getting blown over, lots and lots and lots and lots of branches will get snapped off, and you can go into the woods on a hike a day or two after a windstorm, and it just looks like a bomb went off. You might have a mile section of trail that has 27 trees down that have to be cut up with chainsaws and the trail cleared, and there's nowhere to hide. And so anyway, she calls my sister. My sister's a military family. They've since they're out now, but they were still active duty at the time. And my sister calls me, and then I call my mom, and I can barely hear. The wind is howling so loudly.
She calls
in the background.
on a trail in the middle of the storm.
On a trail in the middle of the storm. I can literally hear snapping and cracking and popping in the background, and I'm like, "Mom, what are you doing? What are you thinking?" And there's nowhere to. You're in a forest, and the scary thing is all the trees, but there's nothing but trees, so you can't. All you can do is either hurry down or hurry up, to try to get above tree line, but that's it. You're just a sitting duck. And so my sister is in a full-blown panic, and I'm packing a backpack and getting, throwing it in the car, and this is 2 hours away for me, so I'm getting ready to try to drive up north, and I think I did actually end up getting in the car and making it about halfway, and I finally get a call from her at the trailhead that she had made it out. I'm just like, "Mom, what is the matter with you?"
So did you ground her after that?
I didn't really have that kind of relationship with her, but my sister definitely did. And yeah, my sister was on her about that kind of stuff for quite a few months after the fact. But
oh man,
that was my mother.
Just like it seemed like she was always out on the trails, from just listening to the stories that you have, and
there was no such thing as weather that kept her out of the mountains.
Yeah. Oh, the pictures that you shared, like she's in, snow and stuff that you would think like an older person just wouldn't do, and she's like slaying it, peaks and snow and crampons and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, she was.
Yeah. My favorite story about my mom was actually a summertime trip. It was July, and she had a hiking partner that she had just incidentally met in the mountains, just like I incidentally met you in the mountains,
Yeah.
actually. And he was a young fella, a young single Hispanic guy named Caesar, who was in his early 20s at the time, and they ended up being hiking partners for, I don't know, almost 10 years before she got cancer and passed away. But I do remember one particular summertime trip where we did a hard hike along up near Snoqualmie Pass on I-90. Called Deception Mountain. It has over 4,000 feet of elevation gain, and I want to say it was like 101 or 102 degrees that day. It was it was brutally hot, and I remember sitting there on the summit and thinking about it, and I realized that she was older than me and Caesar combined.
Yeah.
And she had done a hike with 4,500 feet of elevation gain in 100-degree weather with the two
and probably beat y'all to the peak.
And it was just kind of this incredible. It was, I always knew my mom was tough, but sometimes you don't realize a thing when you're around it all the time.
Yeah.
But it was one of those moments where we were sitting on the summit, and I was just kind of glancing over at her, and I just realized, man, my mother's pretty exceptional, actually.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny that you bring it up, like how her and Caesar met in the mountains and we met in the mountains. Yeah. Like, I can remember, this was the second time that I was in Guadalupe Mountains with Lori, and we were going up Tejas, and we were going to do Hunter's Peak. And, I had done some research, and they said, going up Bear Canyon was hard, and probably Tejas would be a little bit easier. And I remember going up Tejas and then seeing you guys, all three of you, like way down there, like, and I'm just thinking like, oh, look, those people are way, way down there. And I've never claimed that I was in ever good shape. And I just remember thinking like, oh yeah, they're not going to catch us. And then like, it seemed like 2 minutes later, there you guys you're passing us, like we're taking a break and you guys are passing. And I don't think at that time we talked just like, hey, how's it going? And then when you passed us, y'all kind of rounded a corner, and I guess you guys, it was some shade, and you guys decided to take a break. And then, we started hiking again, and probably, a few minutes we caught up to you guys, and we already needed another break. So we kind of like took a break with you guys and just started talking. And like, it's just funny that how this relationship kind of kicked off. Like if we would have kept walking, we wouldn't be sitting here today. So what made you guys come down to Guadalupe Mountains that time? I mean, like, we were up in Washington and
Yeah. And so incidentally, like when you say you guys, he's referring to me and my wife, Megan, and our friend, Mike. And I met Megan in the mountains in 2014. Megan met Mike in the mountains in 2015, and then I believe it was 17 or 18 when we met you and Lori. So yeah, literally all of us met each other because we happened to just run into each other in the mountains. But I just Megan and I are we're passionate about public lands and national parks and national monuments, and it's just a thing that we've always loved to do with our vacation is to sometimes we do kind of more of like a car camping type of a style. Other times we're, backpacking or even, mountaineering and climbing, but we just love visiting national parks. Yeah. And I had no recollections of visiting Guadalupe. I do have pictures of myself there when I was like 2 and 3 with my grandfather. But I just wanted to go and experience it as an adult. And, we had a list of like, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 national parks that were kind of the next on the to-do list. And yeah, and I don't really recall why we picked Guadalupe specifically that year, but in part I wanted to bring Megan to the Davis Mountains too, and so it just kind of ended up being a 2-for-1. But yeah, that's how we ended up in West Texas. And what was that? I think it was right around Thanksgiving that year.
Yeah. And what I always remember from that trip, and I still use it to this very day, is how to take that panoramic photo and be on the bookends of the photo. You taught us that. Yeah. Start at one end, then run behind the person and get to the other end. Yeah. We still use that, and people still ask me, how'd you do that?
Photography
well,
photography is a huge part of my life, and it's always been part of my love of the mountains. As I've always loved photography. I've branched out, of course, as you know, and do all sorts of other types and genres of photography, but photography is always part of the mountains and
absolutely.
camping and climbing and backpacking and just observing the beauty and enjoying the beauty of what God has made. I often, Megan asks me very often, like, what's the most beautiful place I've ever been to, and I do often tell her actually the mountains of West Texas.
Yep.
Incidentally enough, I'm a 2-hour drive from Olympic National Park and a
Yes.
2-hour drive from Mount Rainier National Park. So I mean, I live in some places that are acutely beautiful and will often be listed on whatever the top 10 destinations in North America or what have you. But and they are like the wildflower meadows when the snow finally melts out in July in Mount Rainier National Park are acutely beautiful. They're beautiful in the kind of way that'll take your breath away. But there's something about those wide open and empty desert mountain landscapes that you get in Guadalupe or out in the Chisos and Big Bend that are they don't take your breath away immediately the way that a Mount Rainier will, but I don't know. I think they're just as beautiful if you sit a while.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
look and
And
watch.
like I've lived in Texas my whole life, and only till about 8 years ago did I realize we have mountains and we have such beauty in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Through my friendship with you and really honestly our being friends on Facebook as you've endeavored to start to visit all these various state parks and natural areas in Texas. There's been several times where I'm like, that isn't Texas. That's got to be Prescott, Arizona, or something. Like, what is
Yeah,
it?
absolutely.
And there's places, I lived in Texas for 12 years, but I rarely left the western part of the state for many reasons. But yeah, I just didn't realize some of the diverse beauty that Texas has.
Yeah. And so after that trip, somehow I talked you guys into coming back to Texas because I had a quest to bag all the Guadalupe Peak or the Guadalupe Mountain named peaks, and you guys took some time out of your day, your year vacation, and came all the way back down to Texas. That was an amazing trip for me. And there's a couple of things that I came away from that trip. First off, you don't let us take a break. So Megan and I were mad. Like, I looked at her and I was like, so we're doing Bush Peak because that's one of the peaks that was in the plans.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's what is it, about 14-15 mile round trip?
It's hard to get to.
Yeah,
It's
it's
kind of out
not.
there, you kind of think of the layout of Guadalupe. You kind of got, one entrance at the top and one in the bottom and one over the side, and Bush is kind of nowhere near any of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you got to go up like 5 or 6 peaks, smaller peaks, to get out there to it. And I remember like and absolutely, your experience, you don't want to stop and rest for very long because you start to get cold.
Mm-hmm.
And out there it gets pretty cold. But I can just remember looking at Megan and I go, is he always like this? Like, he doesn't ever let us take a break? And she's like, no. She goes, you're lucky to get 3 or 4 minutes and then it's time to go.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not a I'm
so
not a I'm not a fast guy. I mean, I can hike fast, and I did briefly get into trail running and that kind of stuff. But
yeah,
I don't I'm not let's go really fast, but I am kind of let's get a consistent pace and hold it for long periods of
yeah.
time. I suppose.
And then, and it's funny, like some of the stuff that I still use today, like when you were saying, kind of like if you're leading a group, to listen to the people behind you, their breath,
Yeah.
and get in tune with that, and then that'll dictate what pace you should be at, or carrying on a conversation. And if they can talk, then the pace is good. If they're struggling to talk, then maybe slow down. So I use a lot of the stuff that you taught me, and just kind of going through there. But what's funny is we get to the campsite, so I get to see John and Megan. I'm so excited. And you pull out this 4-seasoned palace, and you set it up, and this thing, it looks like you would take this on Everest or something. I mean, just an amazing tent. And I have my very first backpacking tent. It was like a $70 gear top,
Yeah.
trekking pole, single trekking pole tent.
Yeah.
and and even now, like, I have some nice tents, but like because of the wind at Guadalupe, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, like I'm scared to take my duplex or my big Agnes. So, that's all I had at the time. And I set it up, and I'm so proud of it. And that night, man, the wind was crazy.
Hmm.
Like, I
Yeah,
don't know what,
that was the second worst wind I've ever been in a tent.
yeah, and I don't know what the gusts were. I just remember the one time the gust, I mean, you could hear it. It was like a train coming through the little canyon, and then all of a sudden it hit us. And I mean, it was like an explosion. And I just remember, it's probably what, 2, 3 in the morning. And I just remember you saying, Jason, are you okay? Like, just because the wind, hit so
Yeah.
hard that,
Yep.
probably you were thinking my tent would have ripped up or broke my
Yeah.
trekking pole or something. But man, it was crazy.
Yeah, the winds were at the point where like seams were going to start to pull apart, and yeah, it was very, very, very windy.
And I think that also altered us from camping. I think we were going to do camp out on, I don't remember if it was Bush or Pine Top, but we canceled it because of the winds.
Yeah, bush camp. We were looking
Yeah.
at the wind forecasts, and I want to say they were predicting like 60 and 70 miles an hour down at Pine Springs, but it was nearing 100 up there at Bush, and I was like, I know that's going to basically pin you on the ground, rolled up in your tent like you would roll up a burrito or something with the tortilla, and it would be it wouldn't. I mean, you're not going to die, but it would be a very miserable night.
Man, and like, before I started hiking these elevations, starting at 3 and 4 in the morning, I used to go kind of like at a normal time, and you would get the people coming down, and yeah, I mean, their tent stakes would be broke, tents ripped apart during the middle of the night. So yeah, there's no joke with the
Yeah,
winds up there.
you really need 3 season. Yeah, that's a little bit of advice if you're headed to Guadalupe Mountains. And of course, it varies. It's not always windy, but you can definitely encounter winds there where a 3 season tent is a necessity, and a 4 season tent might be nice.
Yeah.
I had
And
that particular tent that Jason mentioned. It was a 4 season mountaineering tent that was basically
yeah,
made for the Alaska range.
yeah, no, the poles would look at Guadalupe wind and laugh. Like, they're
Yeah.
not going to get
Yeah.
messed up at all.
Yeah, I mean, that tent was heavy. Like, it's not the kind of thing you're going to go backpacking with in normal conditions. But
Yeah.
in a place where you're car camping and it's that windy, it is very nice to have.
And I also remember, like, our last day, if I'm not mistaken, we were going to do El Capitan Peak, and then kind of like when we were finished, leave. So we get up that morning, probably 3:30, 4 in the morning, start cooking breakfast and all that. And then we start hiking. And El Cap, for those that you don't know, it's off trail. So you head up Guadalupe Peak Trail, and then right as you get up to Guadalupe Peak, you kind of come off trail, and it's the rock face that you see coming into the park from Van Horn, and it's steep. It's no joke. Like, and so we were going to bag that one, and I would have only attempted it with John and maybe 1 or 2 other people, because of the experience. But so if you've never hiked Guadalupe Peak, so we start up Guadalupe Peak, and the first part of Guadalupe Peak, I would say the first 3/4 of a mile to mile is probably the most difficult. And so right when we finish the hardest part of Guadalupe Peak, you just all of a sudden get sick. You fall to your knees and get sick, like to your stomach. And I just remember thinking, like, could you have not gotten sick, like 30 minutes before this? Like, we just finished the hardest part, and then, you got sick. And so I was kind of giggling to myself, like, oh, you should have gotten sick before we finished the hard part.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I still to this day
That
don't
was
know what happened.
crazy.
It was relatively short lived. I felt catastrophically awful for 3-4 hours, and then it kind of lingered for about 24 hours. But then the next day I was okay. Some sort of a stomach thing.
Man, you look,
I'm assuming I ate something bad, but I
yeah.
never did figure out what that was. But yeah, I was definitely vomiting, and it was pretty
Yeah, you
nasty.
didn't look good. I mean, as soon as you turn to me and you go, I don't feel good. I'm like, yeah, let's turn around because yeah, you're not looking good.
Yeah, yeah,
But that
that was a big bummer. But you did end up going on to doing it another day.
yeah, and I met an experienced hiker that we are friends to this day named Sam out of New Mexico.
Yeah,
We met because he had a hyperlight backpack like me, and I'm like, oh, you must be an experienced guy. And we started talking, and
yeah,
so now like all even hiking in Colorado, he'll come and visit. Great guy, and another wonderful person that you meet in the mountains.
yeah. Oh yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. And that's you and I are very similar in that you love Guadalupe Mountains is your place. It's
Oh man,
I refer to it as your park. That's
yeah,
Jason's park,
yeah,
and you love to go back over and over and over again and go to new places that others haven't been and re-hike the same trail that you've done before, but do it again, and it's always a different experience every time.
yep.
Maybe the weather's different, or maybe you're alone versus with someone, or whatever it may be, and I'm like that with Mount Rainier. I think I've been taking trips to Mount Rainier since I was 12 or 13 years old, but I've probably been, who even knows? I don't know, probably more than 300 times, maybe 400 times over the last 2.5 decades. So your experience with the Guadalupe Mountains is as I've watched it unravel
Yeah.
and expand the last few years reminds me very much of my own up here in the Cascades.
Yeah, and you've even taken me to Rainier a couple times, and I remember the one time in April when the snow was still there. We got, I guess it was just below the mere snowfields, and there's that very, very steep part to get up to the part, and like I backed out. Like I got up,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe halfway.
Yeah.
And I don't know it was because I was afraid, but certainly I couldn't focus on what I was doing because like I've never been in snow doing that. I have an ice axe and like everything was just spinning
Mm-hmm.
in my head and I'm like, yeah, this is probably not a safe. Like if I could focus on what I was doing, then probably wouldn't have been a big deal, but I couldn't focus and I'm like, I have micro spikes and I'm stepping on this snow condition and I'm not understanding what should I expect
Yeah.
with the snow. Is it going to be slippery? Is there a chance that I'm going to post hole? Like it was all just going in my head and I'm like, all right, yeah. And you even said, are you sure you want to go up? And I'm like, nope. So we turned back down. And the same thing happened to me in Colorado when I was coming off Torrey's Peak so we did Grays and then we did Torrey's and then coming off of Torrey's, there was, man, it had to have been a 2 to 3 foot drop. And you're just walking on this like 8 inches of snow traverse.
Yeah.
And, yeah. And man, I was dying. And what was funny is there was a lady ahead of me hiking and she was from the Woodlands, which is north of like 10 minutes north of me. She had no idea, how to hike this stuff. So I'm like, have my trekking poles and I'm sticking them like an ice axe and then take a step and then stick like an ice axe. And then you have these local yahoos that are, as you're going, they're trying to walk on the same trail as you, knowing that it's only this wide. And like, then they're like trying to step up on the mountain to go around you. And if they slip, they're going to take you off and you all are falling down the mountain.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. I thought one guy was going to fight one of these little kids, but he was started yelling at the kid. But yeah, I made it, we're here today on a podcast, but yeah, that was, the different terrains and stuff for sure. Like, you definitely need experience on them for sure.
Yeah. Exposure's a funny thing. It's odd how just a little something can take a thing, and it'll make it from feeling fine to feeling very scary.
Oh
So
yeah.
sometimes it might just be the wind, the difference between it being calm and being windy. Nothing else
Hmm.
changed, but
Yep.
with that wind, it makes you feel afraid.
And
Or
yeah, what's funny is like I show people pictures of that traverse, and I'm like, and it doesn't look scary, and I'm like, no, it was. You can't see how steep this is and how far
no,
the
it
drop.
it
And
looks
then I
scary to
show
it
them the
looks scary to
picture.
me. I know enough to know.
Yeah, and then I show them the picture of the whole thing, and it still doesn't even really look scary. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I promise it was scary. It was
Yeah, and
deadly.
on snow like that, so much depends upon the condition of the snow. You know
Yeah.
how firm it is. As snow, very early in the morning, when it's mostly frozen, if you were to slip and fall, and then the types of clothes that we tend to wear in the mountains, like our rain gear or our Gore-Tex jackets, they tend to be very slippery on ice, and so if you were to slip and fall on that stuff at 8 o'clock in the morning, it wouldn't have to be much of an angle at all, and you could really start sliding out of control.
Yeah.
But you fast forward 4 or 5 hours and let the warmth of the day start to warm that snow up to where you sink in it just a little bit,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden now, like, you could hardly slide down the mountain even if you wanted to. You
Mm.
just fall in the snow. And so the difference of just 3 or 4 or 5 hours sometimes can make a thing go from very dangerous to quite mellow.
Yeah, and I remember you when we were doing that. You're like, okay, we need to look out for this because of avalanche. And I'm like, Ava, what? And I'm like, oh, what are you bringing me out here? I'm gonna die. No, and I like even in Guadalupe Mountains, I've been in two snowstorms. One, it was really bad. And and then being the more experienced hiker with the, from the person that I brought out there, you start questioning things like, hey, can I make it up and back and the tracks won't be covered up and I could, figure out how to get back.
Yeah.
Like and if my phone lost the chart, so you start running through all these things. And then also, there's some exposure on Guadalupe in a couple of places that you don't want to slip, like,
Hmm.
because, the rock and then having that ice and snow on it. And, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
for sure.
it's a big responsibility. And I don't think I'm going to do an episode. I don't know if it's the next one about just hiker safety. And I don't think that we often think when we step on a trail that there's a danger. I don't care if it's a neighborhood hike. I don't care if it's like there's things that can happen. And sometimes I think that we lose us as hikers, we lose sight of that it's 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 not a joke.
Yeah, a funny thing happens when you come to really, really, truly love whatever it is, the ridge, the mountains, the woods, the outdoors, the lake shore, is you start to think that, well, this thing that I love so much couldn't possibly hurt me. But that's because it brings so much good to my life, and it does.
Mhm.
Those
Yeah,
those those things do bring a ton of good to your life, but yeah, they can actually very much hurt you.
yeah,
Um,
and especially if you don't think through what could happen and what are you going to do. it,
mhm.
it it seems like, reading the books that we read and people making mistakes, and it seems like these mistakes just get compounded. It's one bad decision and another bad decision, and they just kind of like
Yeah.
foster.
Yep.
If you're not prepared, you just start like making things that normally you probably wouldn't make if you would have sat and said, okay, if
Yep.
this happens this, or if this happens this.
Yeah, you need to understand what's outside of yourself. That's bears, trees, floods, avalanches, wind, weather, and then you need to be able to understand yourself, because
Yeah.
when you, like a scenario that you just mentioned, where one bad decision can then lead to another bad decision, you need to understand yourself, and you need to understand how we as human beings behave when we're afraid. I mean, so a classic one that we're probably all aware of is the fight or flight response.
Yeah.
When the wheels start coming off the proverbial bus, we as humans, we do all experience a fight or flight response, and that's very often when really poor decisions start to be made in the mountains, when you allow that to happen. And so a lot of times, being in dicey situations in the mountains is really understanding that fear is there and it's going to happen, and and fear is a good thing. It sort
No.
of keeps us from hurting ourselves. But then knowing yourself well enough to channel it into something that is wise and intelligent,
No.
rather than rash.
All right. So let's say I say, John, come down to Texas. Where are you going to go? Where do you want us to go? State park, national park? What's it going to be?
This one might surprise you, but this is the one that I went to more than anything else, even more than Fort Davis. I'd love to go to Fort Davis with you, brother. My friendship with you means so much to me, and that's where my love of the mountains began. I would love to make a trip there with you someday, but I'm actually going to save the Monahans Sandhills State
Really?
Park. Yeah, they're on.
I have never been. It is on my bucket list, though.
Is that on I-10 or I-20? I can't recall. Is
God.
20 the one that goes all the way to Houston?
I-10.
Okay, so it's 20 then. So if you're headed east on 10 out of the Guadalupes and you're headed back towards Houston, and then you take that, you hang a left on 20 there, like you're going to go up to Midland, Odessa. It's about a half hour before you get to Midland, Odessa. So I grew up going there with my grandparents, and I can remember climbing those sand dunes, and this was only like a half hour from my house. I don't even know if it was full half hour. It might have only been like 25 minutes from where I lived. And so I can remember picnics and playing with my cousins and camping there. And it's like a little miniature version of White Sands National Park in New Mexico, but just kind of out there in the middle of West Texas. And so I would say that one just for nostalgic reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that means we have to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I would absolutely love to go there with you. Yeah. It's not the kind of place you're going to stay a week, but it's certainly the place, a great place to spend the afternoon, or maybe sunset or something on your way home from Guadalupe or from.
And we still have to do El Capitan too.
We do. Yeah. I really want to, I loved your project of the highest 8 peaks, and I really want to do that traverse from Bush to Guadalupe. I think it can be done in a day, but I think you did it in a day, didn't you?
We did it in a day.
Well, you didn't do Bush. You didn't do Bush though, did you?
Well, they did Bush.
Okay.
And I was like, forget y'all. I'm sitting right here on the trail, and I'll wait for you because I've already done it, and I'm already dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. That hike, it's called the Quad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we did it. We left at 3 a.m. and then got back about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah. I remember speaking with Lori on the that evening.
And she was mad that.
Yeah. And I remember reverse engineering your route, actually, because you had had service, and you had posted and sent me a text from the summit of Guadalupe, which that was all on trail to get there. And then I knew you were leaving trail from then. And I had the topo maps and everything, so I could look at the route, and I knew that you were going to be probably hard pressed to go more than a mile an hour. And so I kind of plotted it all out, and I was doing the math and telling Lori, I don't think we don't have anything to worry about yet. And, my math is telling me that he's probably approaching, the Bush saddle right there, right about now. So I think that we should be able to give him at least an hour before he's gonna start to pick service up there on I don't remember whether you were going down Tejas or Bear Canyon, but I knew you'd find service on one of them on the way down.
Yeah, and we didn't do it probably the best way. Like, we lost all the elevation we gained for each peak. And what was really crappy is from Shumar to Bartlett, I wanted to walk down almost, the dry riverbed with Devil's Hall.
Correct. Yeah, I've never done it, but I'm aware of it.
But Devil's Hall goes all the way back there, like that kind of wash. Sure. And I wanted to walk the wash and go up the finger because I could see that it was a steady climb. And they're like, no, let's just go up here and then we'll cut across. Well, that cut across, you're about 400 or 500 feet, and it's steep. I don't know what. I mean, it's steep, and where, like, if you slip, you're in trouble.
Yeah, high consequence fall.
Yeah, and I'm grabbing bushes and walking across, and of course everybody's laughing like, and I'm like, man, I hate y'all. And and I'm the oldest. I was, I think, then 48, 49. Everybody else is in their 30s. So
yeah,
they're not taking it easy on me for sure. So, out of all your experiences hiking in Texas, what's your favorite trail?
Hmm. Probably the window.
Yeah,
I'll try not to
that's
get
your
emotional. Try not to get emotional on this one, but that's. I've been there with the most people. The window in Big Bend, there in the Chisos Mountains, just the
hmm
kind of a trail right there on the bottom side of the campground that goes down the bowl to where the wash is, the pour off. Um, but the main reason is I've been there quite a few times with my mother. My mother passed away of cancer relatively young. I believe she was 61 or 62 in 2018. And then I also my son passed away a couple of years ago, just a few days after his 22nd birthday. But when he was 15, we took a trip down to Big Bend together, the three of us. We also went to the Davis Mountains, as a matter of fact.
yeah.
And I have photos of me and my mom and my son there on that window trail and then Fort Davis, and I still pull those out and look at those from time to time. It's the strangest thing that I'm the only one left, but yeah, that's the one that I think that's the one that sticks out to me the most.
Yeah, and I remember when your mom found out we were together, like we were in Guadalupe, like she
Yeah,
had
it's
messaged you.
just there's this strange connection that I make in my mind between Jason that I'm talking to here right now and my mother. I know you never met her, but it was the day that I met you was the day that she called me to tell me she had cancer.
Yep.
I remember having a voicemail and then like walking around Pine Springs until I found just enough service to try to like get a call through and talk to her for like 5 minutes, and I went back and Mike and Megan were like, "What's wrong?" And I don't know. She had cancer before and beat it before, and I just assumed
Yeah.
it was going to be that again, but it did end up being that. But
Yeah. Well, to wrap this up, I can't not have a conversation with you and have a North Cascades story.
sure.
And just to let all the listeners know, so like Rainier is John's place, Guadalupe's my place. The North Cascades, I think, is a very close second in John's love
Hmm.
areas. And so like kind of to you do some really crazy stuff. To me, crazy. To you, probably normal. Where you're out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and there's decisions that have to be made that are, like the time, and I've never even thought about it, that if we take one more step forward, we have to keep going forward. We can't come back.
Hmm.
Like some of these things that, and some of the experience that you've described, and even talking to Megan, that you're drenched, it's 30 degrees, and
Yeah.
you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you can't afford to make a wrong decision.
Yeah.
And
So
so I
yeah,
have to have the stories that I love. I have to have
yeah,
one.
yeah. There's several. So just to describe the North Cascades, so these are the Canadian border. So this is if you go on those national parks lists that we've mentioned before, if you happen to go on one of the lists that has like the least visited, like what's the least visited national parks, and a lot of the ones in Alaska are on the list, but that's just because you got to fly so far to get to them in a bush plane. But in terms of the ones in the lower 48, Guadalupe is always on the list. Lassen in Northern California is another one, and that's just because everybody goes to Yosemite, of course, and Kings Canyon and so forth. But one of the other ones is North Cascades, and it is kind of hard to get to. It's in northern Washington, right up by the Canadian border. There's almost no roads there. There's quite a few places where you can see North Cascades National Park from a road,
Yeah.
but overwhelmingly you have to walk to get to it. So there's only one road in the park, and it's a gravel unimproved road. And there's some world famous hiking in North Cascades National Park, but what it is really known for is mountaineering. So this would be the the same kind of terrain that you would get in the Alaska range or in the Himalayas or the Karakoram or the Alps in France and Switzerland. Um, in fact, the nickname for North Cascades is the Alps of North America. It looks very similar to what you would see in like Chamonix, France. But it's granitic peaks with lots of glaciers. So more than 75% of the remaining glaciers in the lower 48 all exist within North Cascades National Park. So it's a place of ice and granite peaks, and it's hard to get to. A lot of it is trailless wilderness. There are hiking trails that you can do there, but much fewer than you get with like maybe a Glacier National Park or a Yosemite National Park. But there are lots of off-trail routes that you can do, and it's famous for traverses, where you park. You basically have to have two cars, and you're parking one car at one trailhead, and then you're parking another car at another trailhead, maybe 75 miles away, and then you're just gonna go those 75 miles through the wilderness with no trails. You pick your own route. You have to have a map and know how to use it. And then you would tend to get up high and spend most of your time up on glaciated terrain, or at least above tree line.
Yeah.
And so this is acute, piercing beauty and very remote wilderness. I've been on quite a few of these trips where I never see another human being at all. You might see them for the first couple of miles by the one car, and then for the last couple of miles by the other car, and then 50 miles of nothing.
Yeah.
in the middle. But basically these trips are kind of taking all of the skills that I've spent a lifetime, learning and accumulating, and then applying them. So we're not doing any extremely difficult rock climbing or anything like that, but we'll climb some low fifth class peaks, and then you're using all your glacier travel skills, and hopefully not using crevasse rescue skills, but you have to have them and know them in case. And then most certainly very heavy on the navigation. And then the problem with a lot of these things is there's no bailout points. So most of the roads in the Cascades run west to east. It's just the orientation of the way the mountains are. So you park at one road up north, and then you're going to another road down south, and very often there's a crux section where so for example, on one particular traverse, there's a class 5 rock climb up to the top of a ridge line, and then there's an overhanging rappel on the back side. And so once you make that rappel, that's it. You can't go back the way you came. The only way out is forward. And very often there's no bailouts either. So these are predominantly north to south or south to north traverses. Occasionally, you could take off to the east or the west down a river valley, but more often than not, it would be worse than, the actual route that you're on anyway. So the commitment level is extremely high on a lot of these things. It takes a 10-mile day off trail is equivalent to about a 30-mile day on trail, just in terms of caloric output and all the rest. So you're doing 12 to 14-hour days to go 8 or 9 miles. And you get out there in the middle of all that, and you're 26 miles into a 52-mile traverse, and there's no bailouts, and something happens, whatever it might be, a sprained ankle or the weather goes bad. We had a particular trip that we were a trio of us were on, and the weather went exceptionally bad, and the wheels kind of came off the proverbial bus. We had one of us did have a satellite navigation device with SOS capabilities for just in case. And from that, we were able to receive updated weather forecasts from the National Weather Service. And we had like a 72-hour window where we were expecting heavy wintry mix. This is July, but temps are in the 30s, and it's fluctuating between freezing rain and snow and sleet. And we're getting hammered with heavy winds. We are 3 days into a 5-day traverse. We only have 3 days worth of food left. It's going to take us 2 days to get out. And the Weather Service is calling for 3 solid days of really severe, terrible weather. You're you don't have any. There's no option that's the good option.
Yeah.
But yeah, we ended up pushing on that one particular day. This was on the Ptarmigan Traverse, by the way. It's a very well known mountaineering route. Actually, Outside Magazine wrote up an article about it a couple years ago, called it the most beautiful mountaineering traverse in North America. And it is acutely beautiful, but it's acutely nasty when the weather turns bad. But we got caught in heavy winds and rain. We were going up and over the Dana Glacier that day before leaving White Rock Lakes, headed for Cub Lake, there right near Dome Peak. And it was raining, just absolute downpour, pouring rain. Some of the spot forecasts that we ended up looking at that NOAA had put out were saying that 5 to 8 inches of rain fell in various places just during a 24-hour period. And the winds were 50 sustained, and we were occasionally getting gusts that had to have been around 70 or 80 because they were pinning us down. We're all roped together climbing a glaciated pass. I couldn't see Brandon at all in the front, and half the time I couldn't see Megan in the middle. So I just watched the rope disappear into nothingness. I'm just following the rope. And
Brandon, he's a guide. He's
a guide by training. He's actually IFMGA certified, so he can guide anywhere in the world. But he said it was the worst situation he's ever been in with a client. And it was bad. Temps were probably, I don't know, mid 30s. It was just warm enough to be rain, and we're 5 to 8 inches of rain fell, and we're getting hammered with hurricane force winds. Everything is soaked. I got really severely cold, scary cold. I was definitely crossing from stage 1 into stage 2 hypothermia, and it was a dire situation. There were rivers pouring down out of the cirque. At one point in time, as we're up there in the top, getting ready to drop off the backside, we're in this like mile-wide glaciated cirque, and all the water that is falling on the glacier is being funneled through this one spot, and we have to cross it. And we literally scraped the snow off to reveal bare glacier ice, ran an ice screw down into the blue ice, and then set up a belay. And then we crossed basically just a river that was tearing down off the glacier in about thigh deep water, over to the other side, and then run another ice screw in, and then belay the group across. But and then there were a bunch more really scary river crossings on the way out. Yeah, it was the one time in the mountains that I thought that there's a real legitimate chance I could die out here. But,
man, and we read about this stuff all the time. Hear stories on the internet, articles of
happened to me.
Yeah, and then that's just crazy. It just goes. I think we've already talked about it, that every time you step on the trail, man, you can't take anything for granted.
Megan got really mad that day.
Oh, I'm surprised she still talks to you.
She was not interested in even going for a day hike for a good 6 months after that incident.
Yeah. And like you said, you get to a point, you can't go back. I can't go to this trailhead and just get some help. You got to just keep going.
Once we got soaking wet and the weather was that bad, and the wind, of course, when you're wet and it's windy, that is a terrible, terrible, terrible combination. I think I read somewhere that you lose heat 30 times faster than you do when it's both wet and windy. And so at that point in time, you're in a situation where you can't stop either, because the only thing that is maintaining your body heat from things really spiraling out of control is your movement and the heat you're generating by exercising. So it was a really scary situation.
So you're not just mean when you hike and tell us no resting, let's go. There's a reason behind it.
Yeah, there was no resting that day. I think we were on the move for 4 or 5 hours without stopping at all.
And I remember you telling me that I guess you were belaying Brandon across one of those glaciated river washes, and he just said, if I slip and go, just let me go.
Yeah, it was a river. It wasn't even normally a river there, but because of the extreme rainfall there was, and this was just this was just polished granite. So this is where 100 years ago, a glacier had been there and had carved all that granite smooth. And then the recession of the glaciers over the last bunch of decades is just leaves these patches of smooth granite that are often, 1,000 or even 2,000 feet high. They might be, 20 degrees, 30 degrees. It's real common in the North Cascades, but there was a river that we had to cross about waist deep, belly button deep, and there was just no way to rig up a belay that would, that could kind of cover all of our options and all of our bases and all of our what ifs. And Brandon, we just kind of wrapped the rope around a boulder, and so that if he slipped in, that it would hopefully hold him. But then there was a waterfall beyond that where it went over a cliff. He just told me where Megan couldn't hear it, that if he falls in and I can't hold him and he starts to go over that, just let it go.
That's crazy.
But yeah, it was the wheels were definitely coming off of our bus by that point in time.
When you're on a hike and you just hear, just let it go.
Yeah, that was not fun.
No,
but, that ended up being one of those trips though that, once you finally get home and decompress and get warm again, and you have a few weeks to think about it, it's what we call type 2 fun, I guess.
Yeah. No, and I know we talked about it before the podcast started, like, the stories that you have, I love them, and I want to have just an episode of John's stories because they're awesome. I mean, like the experience, the stuff that you learn from them. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I want to first off, we're going to probably wrap this up because I know you're busy, but again, starting this endeavor podcast and stuff, there's outside of Lori, there's no one else that I would have wanted to have as one of the first guests. I'm honored that we were able to do this, and I just want to thank you for taking the time. I think we're at about an hour, and for out of your day and joining this new hobby of mine. And we definitely need to get out on the trails together for sure.
Oh, 100%, brother. I'm honored to be on here and to talk with you. Feels completely normal. Just basically having a conversation just like we would anyway.
Yeah.
But sure. Yeah, absolutely. I would anywhere, whether Texas or something else up here in Washington, or
we are
maybe someplace new to both of us.
Yeah. When we are talking about heading up, I think spring break, so I'll definitely let you know.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining the podcast. Episode 2 is in the books. We look to probably be putting this out Monday. What's today? I think
it's the 16th or the 17th is today.
Yeah, 17th. So it'll be the 22nd. So we'll be dropping. And thanks everybody for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.